So I want to start off this morning with a reading that comes from a question that was asked of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's an American astrophysicist and science communicator. And he was asked, what's the most astounding fact that you can share about the universe? And he said this: the most astounding fact is the knowledge that the atoms that comprise life on Earth, the atoms that make up the human body, are traceable to the crucibles that cooked light elements and heavy elements in their core under extreme temperatures and pressure. These stars, the high mass ones among them, went unstable in their later years, and then they collapsed and then expanded, scattering their enriched guts across the galaxy, guts made of carbon and nitrogen and oxygen and all the fundamental ingredients of life itself. These ingredients became part of gas clouds that condensed, collapsed, formed the next generation of solar systems, stars with orbiting planets, and those planets now have the ingredients for life itself. So that when I look up at the night sky, and I know that, yes, we are part of this universe, we are in this universe, but perhaps most important than both of those facts is that the universe is in us. When I reflect on that fact, and I look up at the heavens, I know many people feel small because they're small and the universe is big, but I feel big because my atoms came from those stars. There's a level of connectivity. That's really what you want in life. You want to feel connected. You want to feel relevant. You want to feel like a participant in the ongoings of activities and events around you. And that's precisely what we are, just by being alive. Here ends this morning's reading. So I have a good friend, Debbie, and we went to dance camp in sixth grade together. And she owns a dance studio in a small town outside of Madison, Wisconsin. Now, both she and her husband are self-employed and uninsured. And what you should know about Debbie is this: she is of solid Norwegian stock, like farm stock. She's beautiful and tough and strong and like can pick up a 50-pound hay bale and throw it around like any young whippersnapper. She lives about 6 miles outside of the town that, she's near. And she and her family and 3 kids are kind of modern day homesteaders. They live off the vegetables from their garden. They eat the eggs from her chickens. They butcher their chickens, and they also grow hops for a local brewery. And not that long ago, she told me this story. So you see, her husband, Bob, needed oral surgery. And the 2 of them saved up to pay for the surgery because they don't have insurance, and that's often what they do. They pay for it with cash. So Bob went off to have this surgery, and when Bob was done with the procedure, Debbie helped him in the car and she drove them home, and then they walked into this mudroom that they have in the back of their house that's connected to kind of the kitchen. And she put Bob into a chair in the mudroom, like had him sit there. He said he was hungry. He was holding on to this bag that he had with him. And she goes into the kitchen to make some soup for him for lunch. And all of a sudden she hears this like thump on the ground. And she yells out, "Hey, Bob, are you okay?" And nothing came. She yells, "Bob," again. "Bob, hey, Bob." He didn't answer. She goes out into the mudroom, and Bob is slumped down into his chair. He isn't breathing. His pulse is gone. Now, at the time, Bob is 49. And Debbie says in that scan of like 30 seconds, when she's out there, assessing her husband, who is got nothing going on right now, she's thinking through her head, like, do I call the ambulance? But it's actually snowing outside. It's going to take them too long to get here. And then by that time, they're not going to be able to save him. Plus, I don't even have the money to pay for the, for the ambulance. And then she says that the other thing that went through her head is like, well, can I get him down on the ground out of the chair? But it's a cement floor, so she's worried that she's going to bonk his head. Anyway, she says in that moment, like 30 seconds later, she says she just starts screaming at Bob. She's like, God damn it, Bob, you cannot die on me. And she takes her fist and she pounds on his chest 4 or 5 times. And all of a sudden, like on the 5th to 10th, she doesn't really know, Bob takes this huge breath and he's just dripping in sweat. And he starts breathing again and comes back. When I tell that story to any doctor or, anybody in the medical profession, evidently they don't really believe it, that it's like a 1 in a millionth chance that you can get somebody back from all of that, right? So it's kind of an astounding story. And anyway, so my friend Debbie said that for the next couple of months following all of that, after that resurrection, if you will, Bob was profusely grateful. He said, I love you multiple times in the day. Debbie was his savior, right? She was treated with extreme joy and adulation, showered with occasional gifts and flowers, turned into a queen. And then, Debbie says, as months went on and things seemed regular and fine for Bob, her life went back to the regular, comfortable appreciation that they always had for each other, minus kind of that high-pitched volume so loud and deafening, keeping them attuned to awe that jolted both of them back to life. By June, Debbie says that she was no longer queen in her castle, but a regular wife who was loved by her husband, and, they were back to their regular routine. So I've been thinking about that story since she told that to me. And it's made me believe human beings are a lot like Bob, all of us. Here's how. That kind of holy cow moment, right? That's incredible. We've all had something in our lives, I think, something that makes us feel, as one author put it, like we reach a state of rapture, something that offers a radiant ecstasy, something that makes your being absolutely ravished emotionally. Awe. Whew. That is intense, right? It is fever pitched. It is awesome. So we too have those moments where awe pounds life kind of back into us. And yet we do what Bob did after a while, don't we? We go back to our normal routines, right? We go back to what we know, and awe fades kind of into a resplendent story now told without the emotionally kind of ravished heart present in the retelling. Now, scientists will tell you there is a name for that. It's called hedonic adaptation, which is the tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative effects or life changes. So we go back to normal. And but there's more, right, to that. When you have death kind of like right up in your face, so to speak, whether your own or someone you love, when you are practically serenading the Grim Reaper, or you've just watched someone you love waltz off into the looming kind of presence of the Grim Reaper, you are immersed, rattled, kind of reminded of the wonders and mysteries of life itself, often even in your grief. And there in front of you is this wonderful and kind of like terrifying space that we can all inhabit at times. It's a liminal space where we reside between wonder over here and fear on this side, between our wonder at life and our fear at death, where life literally pounds itself back into us. It's the kind of awe that happens when we realize we are really the only species on the planet that knows we have a limited time and space here, right? That we hold within us kind of a consciousness of the end of our days. And when that consciousness looms large, it can be a jolt to the present, to the gift of life, to the wonders of our everyday, amazing, crazy kind of existence here and now. Now, if you can sustain, though, that space for more than a couple days, there's another awe that kind of accompanies it. It is the consciousness of the expanse of time, of the billions of years in the making to our present, and the breathtakingly prolonged continuum. We are in awe, kind of our little teeny weeny little ant lives being a mere microscopic thread in that expanse. And when you think about it, that's crazy, right? And every now and then we can reside in that wonder as sheer players in a cosmic theater. Every now and then we can reside there and have our hearts beat and expand, and we are in awe of all of that. We're in awe of that liminal space between wonder and fear. But friends, that's exhausting. And here's the rub. We humans often end up tipping more towards the fear side of that liminal space rather than the wonder side of the liminal space, mainly because our existential angst starts creeping in. Confronted kind of with such vastness, with timetables hardly comprehensible to our human brains that often can't, remember what we did 2 years ago, much less even, I don't know, I have a hard time remembering what happened to me a week ago. Brains that don't often know how to think through the ramifications of an era or a century because we ourselves weren't even born yet. And this crazy continuum of time of billions and millions of years, it can make us very anxious because we can't really process that amount of time. It is what one modern day scientist calls the reality of the existential bummer. And it is from that consciousness that our questions arise, right? Questions that have thrown humans into a tailspin, I don't know, since the recording of human time. Why are we here? Why does it matter? We are specks, even less than specks. We are the who's on the speck that live in Whoville that Horton, the elephant, can barely hear, but we are the who's speck on the speck on the speck. You get the idea. You can feel that liminal space kind of shrinking, can't you, when you think about it that way? I know I sure can. Further, as my husband regularly likes to remind me, in the end, we are all going to die. Did you hear me? We're going to die. I often say to him, yes, honey, I know. We're going to die. I hear you. But that liminal space for my husband, Scott, is not one he sits with comfortably very long. He often tips over into that fear side. He says to us in the family, anybody who's willing to listen, because he says this often, and it's an ongoing conversation. But he says, really, whose idea was it to come up with this death stuff, right? Seriously, couldn't you have thought it through a little more? Really, you have life over here, like happiness, joy, well-being, consciousness. And then over here, you have death, you have the abyss, you have nothingness, you have deadness. What would you pick? My husband, Scott, is really kind of hoping that science will come up with something before he dies that will allow his consciousness to remain forever. And as he likes to joke, and I'm serious about this, he doesn't even care if there's a body attached to that included in his equation. As long as he has his head, he's okay. His plan, though, is to put that head on a skateboard that he would then, according to him, all of us in the family would happily drag along like a dog on a leash while he tells us where to place him at dinner parties and the church and at the grocery store. And I told him once that when, I go to the grocery store. I'm going to put him in the trunk with his skateboard, and I'm not bringing him into the grocery store. And then he goes on and he tells me then, well, all he's going to do is yell out to everyone who's nearby that trunk what a terrible person I am, and how could I ever put someone in a trunk like that? If you haven't noticed, my husband Scott is a lover of that poet Dylan Thomas, who says, I will not go quietly into that good night, but instead rage against the dying of the light. Except, seems to me, we all know Scott is not the only one where that liminal space is too intense actually to sustain. There's a great essay written by Sigmund Freud called On Transience. And in it, he recalls walking through a garden with the poet Rilke. And at one point, Rilke kind of like tears up in this beautiful garden, and Freud asks him, well, what's wrong? You know, like it's a beautiful day out. What's going on with you? There's beautiful plants, everything's magnificent. To which Rilke replied to him, well, I can't really get over the fact that one day all of this is going to die. All these trees, all these plants, all this life is going to decay. Everything dissolves in meaninglessness when you think about the fact that impermanence is a real thing. So yeah, Scott isn't the only one that is uncomfortable with that liminal space that holds wonder on one hand and fear on the other, and the undeniable human tendency to lean towards fear rather than wonder. And yes, when that liminal space tips towards fear, there is a raging of the light, because all of this is impermanent, right? All of it. The chairs you sit on, the building you're in, the trees outside, and certainly those fruit flies that you may get around your fruit. Now, they obviously have a quicker end, but all of it is gone. It seems to me that this natural leaning tendency we have toward the fear is why religious traditions actually have sought to answer humans' existential angst for millennium by promising, heaven or purgatory or reincarnation, multiple levels of nirvana, or a paradise with virgins. All of these religious answers, they do indeed soften that fear. They delude the worry into a balm to remedy kind of an anxious soul about death. On the surface, Unitarian Universalists don't concern themselves with a balm. This is a tradition concerned about living well in the here and now, not worrying about the next. That's not really our concern. And undoubtedly, some of us do believe that there is some form of consciousness that remains after death. But the question of what happens after death is still left up to each of us to decide on our own. And as a tradition, we don't appear to give an answer. The fact is, most of the time, we are all well and good with the Unitarian Universalist response that it is every now and then. We're okay with it every now and then that the Bob kind of awe comes around, places you in that liminal space between wonder and fear. The kind of awe that would like to respond to the religious answers so we humans can spend our days not raging against the light or caught in debilitating worry. Today, though, I want to propose that we Unitarian Universalists actually have an answer to death. We have an answer to calm the cosmic drama, mainly because of personal experience. It has indeed calmed me down throughout the years, so much so that I can put this kind of awe and understanding in my pocket as a kind of charm, as a reminder, as a blessed reassurance. Ironically, it's something that many religious people might scoff at, I think, yet I know deeply that as a Unitarian Universalist, the answer for us is not faith, it's science. It is science, actually, that bridges the gap from impermanence and indifference to meaning. It is science that reminds us that we are all inextricably connected to each other, to the earth, to the planets, to the stars. We always have been, and we're kind of always going to be. As Neil deGrasse Tyson stated in the reading I shared with you before, he says, remember this, he says, when I look up at the night sky, and I know that, yes, we are part of the universe, and we are in this universe, but perhaps more important than both of those facts is that the universe is in us. When I reflect on that fact and I look up at the heavens, I know many people feel small because they're small and the universe is big, but I feel big because my atoms came from those stars. There's a level of connectivity. That's really what you want in life, he says. You want to feel connected. You want to feel relevant. You want to feel like a participant in the ongoings of activities and events around you. And that's precisely what we are, just by being alive. I found this other piece years ago that also helps me. It's by this guy named Aaron Friedman. He writes this: you want a physicist to speak at your funeral. You want the physicist to talk to your grieving family about the conservation of energy so they will understand that your energy has not died. You want the physicist to remind your sobbing mother about the first law of thermodynamics, that no energy gets created in the universe and none is destroyed. You want your mother to know that all your energy, every vibration, every BTU of heat, every wave of every particle that was her beloved child remains with her in this world. And the physicist will remind the congregation of how much energy all of us have that is given off as heat. There may be a few kind of fanning themselves with their programs as he says it, and he will tell them that the warmth that flowed through you in life is still here. It's still part of all that we are, even as we who mourn continue the heat of our own lives. And you'll want the physicist to explain to those who loved you that they need not have faith. Indeed, they should not have faith. Let them know that they can measure precisely the conservation of energy and found it accurate, verifiable, and consistent across space and time. According to the laws of conservation of energy, not a bit of you is gone. You're just less orderly. I want to end this morning with this. A couple of years ago, I went to the Natural History Museum in New York City, and it's honestly like one of my favorite museums. And I've gone multiple times, but there I really had like this pocket kind of awe experience. There's a continuum of time that is representative of the cosmos. It starts at 15 billion years ago with the Big Bang on the second floor. And you work your way down kind of this spiral staircase ramp from the second floor to the first floor, following the continuum of time. And you have to make it almost to 1/3 of the bottom where our universe is even formed. And then much farther along the oceans, and then come along small life forms, and then finally dinosaurs. And at the very end, in this like 1/2 inch space, is human history. And there I stood, kind of wishing I could pull out a pocket of mine that I had that awe that I could keep with me. I wanted so badly to have a star in my pocket because it was there where the time and space were transcended. And I knew as firmly as I know my name, as much as I can hear the breathing of my child when she sleeps, or even the scent of my beloved's favorite shirt, that I wasn't just part of the universe. Indeed, I knew that I had the universe in me. And right there, it was that I wanted to take a star out of my pocket and in its small and sticky form and make my mark kind of on that continuum, like take it out and press it down. A representation that I am of stardust in my composition, as are you. Indeed, it was not an earth-shattering kind of Bob awe, but a pocket kind of awe that holds you and keeps you and lets you into that liminal space so you can reside there a little longer, a little calmer, a little more assured of your place in the grand theater of life. So all those years ago, I didn't have a star, but I do now. Hold on one second. I put this little star, you know, the kind that when you play piano, they'd put on your piece that you had finally succeeded with. Anyway, I put this little star, and sometimes I put it in my pocket. Sometimes I leave it in a certain drawer that I know I'm going to see often. But I use it to remind me of that liminal space of science, actually. And I'm hoping that you actually can find some kind of star, something that maybe, I don't know, you put out part of the holiday and you just keep out for a while, or that you find a little star like this and you put it in your pocket. I'm hoping that throughout your time on this planet, you will pull out that star and remember you're not just part of the universe, but the universe is in you. And that you will go on with your day with a pocket awe that holds you and keeps you and heals you, that reminds you you are intricately and beautifully connected to the oneness of all, stardust, one and all. May it be so. Amen.